I'm Charlie Winterbauer, co-chair of the Southeast chapter of the North Carolina Native Plant Society. And this recording is for our Native Plant Festival, 2020 Native Plant Festival, which is under the COVID restrictions, so that's why we're doing this virtual. So today we have Lloyd Singleton, and I want to say a little bit about what he's going to talk about. He's going to talk about the health of soil, and this is, I've for years have always thought this needs to be emphasized a little bit more, because it's kind of like building a house. If you don't have a good foundation on your house, you're not going to have a stable house. And if you don't have good soil, healthy soil, your native plants might not, won't do as well as they can. So this is, to me, this is really an important topic to talk about and to do something about your soil if you can. So Lloyd Singleton serves as the director of the NC Cooperative Extension, New Hanover County Center at the Arboretum. He has a master's degree in agroecology. I never have heard of that before, but now I have, from the University of Florida, and decades of experience in the ornamental landscape industry in management and education. Lloyd, go for it.
All right. Well, thank you all for attending today, and I hope that you come away with a good understanding of a little bit more about our soils and how to help keep them happy. To give you a little bit of my background, I moved here from Central Florida 2 years ago, and I had lived in Central Florida, which was a big citrus production area. And recently, not only are development pressures really putting a lot of constraints on citrus production in Central Florida, but there's a new disease called citrus greening. And I was able to be involved in several experiments that talked about the improvement of the soil health as a way to help these trees combat citrus greening. So I'm going to use that analogy a little bit as we go through our discussion of soil health, recognizing that most of you are probably here not because you have citrus trees, but because you are gardeners and you are wanting to have a beautiful, hopefully native plant landscape in your home or business. So my first recommendation is we go ahead and begin to shift our focus from plant health to soil health. I propose it's time. Soil supports an important ecosystem of living organisms, fungus, bacteria, and a whole lot more. There's an increasing discussion and interest in soil health among scientists, gardeners, horticulturists, agriculturists, anyone that has to grow anything, because soil health is generally synonymous with soil quality. It can impact not just the sustainability of a system, but also the water holding capacity, nutrient availability, yield, and overall plant productivity. So I encourage you, don't just focus on whether a plant is healthy, but let's begin to focus on the soil health. As an alternative approach, Florida citrus growers had always understood the importance of soil health and the positive influence of microbial activity and diversity in production. As citrus greening, this awful disease, has spread, reduced the production by more than 70%. Interest grew in how these tiny organisms can improve root health. Research showing disease can reduce citrus fibrous root density by 30 to 50% before the symptoms even show up. It intensifies the interest to learn more. So instead of a focus on the health of the plant, we propose a focus on the health of the soil. A resilient, healthy soil is capable of recovering from or adapting to stress, and we know we have lots of environmental stresses these days. The health of the living biological component of the soil is also crucial for soil resiliency, its ability to bounce back with all these stresses. The living component of soil, or the soil biota, represents a very small fraction, just a fraction of a percent of the dry weight, but it is essential to many of the soil functions and overall soil quality. Some of these functions are listed here: nutrient provision and cycling, getting food to the plants, protecting from pests and pathogens, producing the factors that help a plant grow, making water available to the plant, reducing erosion risk, and also increasing water infiltration. And that's important, particularly in our areas of flooding. The more water can go into a soil, the less runoff and therefore pollutants into our water bodies. So unfortunately, soil degradation has been the norm for several decades, not just in our ag production, but also in our ornamental landscapes. I propose it's time we change our methods, knowing this. So I think it's very important to recognize that soil actually is part of a food web. We're part of that food web too. We're mammals and we like to eat. If we're not able to support a healthy soil food web, we will actually see a reduction in available food for us. An incredible diversity of organisms makes up the food web, range in size from tiniest one-cell bacteria, algae, fungi, protozoa, to more complex nematodes and microarthropods, and then to the visible earthworms, insects, small vertebrates, and of course plants. As these organisms eat, grow, and move through the soil, they make it possible for us to have clean water, clean air, healthy plants, and moderated water flow. There are many ways that the soil food web is part of a larger ecosystem. The soil organisms decompose organic compounds, including manure, plant residue, and pesticides, preventing them from entering water and becoming pollutants. They sequester nitrogen and other nutrients that might otherwise also enter groundwater, and they fix nitrogen from the air, making it available to plants. Many organisms enhance soil aggregation and porosity, and we'll talk a bit more about that later, thus increasing the infiltration and reducing runoff. Soil organisms prey on crop pests and are also food for above-ground animals. Productive soil is alive with billions of microbial organisms. For example, bacteria and fungi per gram, and 4 billion microbial organisms in just a teaspoon of soil. The primary components of the soil web do include fungi, bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, and microarthropods. They are our friends. So plants growing require all these. They will share in some of the carbohydrates and sugars with microbial communities that release them from their roots to attract more soil microbes. Root exudates released into the rhizosphere, which is the area of soil immediately surrounding the roots, supply the soil microbes with food, and the microbes in turn supply the plant with nutrients such as nitrogen or phosphorus. The main microorganisms of the soil food web are all of those. So let's talk about the soil environment. These organisms live in a microscale environment within and between soil particles. Differences over very short distances in pH, moisture, pore size, and the types of food available create a very broad range of habitat. So again, picture just millions and billions of microorganisms in a teaspoon of soil, and that's all in between the particles. So think of soil organic matter as the food for the soil food web, food or fuel. Soil organic matter, often abbreviated SOM, is one of the main determinants of the soil microbial diversity and is critical for the overall soil health. Organic matter is generated through the decomposition of plant material and microorganisms. It provides energy or carbon to the soil microorganisms, and it can improve soil stability and the water holding capacity. Soil microbiology thrives best in soils that are high in organic matter. The sandy soils that we have here in coastal southeast North Carolina have minimal organic matter and therefore minimal water and nutrient holding capacity. In Florida's example, The root systems that were reduced by citrus greening combined with the sandy soils were a very poor combination for tree health and ultimately the citrus yield and quality. So this illustration here shows an ideal soil content where 5% of your soil would be soil organic matter. Do you know what yours is? Have you had your soil tested? I venture to say, if you're like most people in this area, your soil organic matter content is going to be between 1 and 2%. So we have some room to grow. As I mentioned, the rhizosphere is the region of the soil in the vicinity of plant roots. This is critical. This is where the chemistry and the microbiology is influenced by growth, respiration, and nutrient exchange. The rhizosphere is a narrow region of soil that is directly influenced by root secretions and the associated soil microorganisms, also known as the root microbiome. Next, we're going to talk briefly about the roles of these different soil microbes. Growing and reproducing are the primary activities of all living organisms. As individual plants and soil organisms work to survive, they depend on interactions with each other. Byproducts from growing roots and plant residue feed on soil organisms. In turn, soil organisms support plant health as they decompose soil organic matter, they cycle nutrients, they enhance soil structure, and control the populations of soil organisms, including crop pests. The various soil microbes do perform different roles. Many fungi and bacteria are important in breaking down organic matter, and their presence in soil holds onto the nutrients so that after their death, the nutrients are made available once again. The other microorganisms, protozoa, beneficial nematodes, microarthropods, are predatory and help to maintain the level of nutrients in the rhizosphere that are available to plants. Fungi are the only microbe that can break down lignin, the compound that gives wood its rigidity. Saprophytic fungi decompose dead wood and other plant matter, thereby adding organic matter to the soil. Another important group of fungi are the mycorrhizae, which form a beneficial relationship with plant roots. You've probably heard of mycorrhizae fungi. It can be divided into two different groups. The endomycorrhizae are going to be a fungus that sends their hyphae, which is branching microscopic filaments, into the cells of plant roots. And then ectomycorrhizae are going to form a protective cover over the roots. These mycorrhizal fungi provide the plant with nutrients, primarily phosphorus, in addition to water. The protective barrier created by the ectomycorrhizae are effective against pathogenic fungi, parasitic nematodes, and other disease-causing organisms. Mycorrhizae fungi also play a large role in creating the soil structure and moving nutrients and water throughout the soil, as mycorrhizae fungi are capable of spreading throughout the soil and joining the root systems of every plant and entire forest together. So endo and ectomycorrhizae, endo going in and ecto around. Bacteria are another component of a healthy soil food web because they move in to break down smaller pieces of wood and other plant material after the fungi have decayed the lignin. Their role in the decay process is just as important as the fungi's. Bacteria are single-celled organisms that are much more biologically diverse than the fungi. Free-living, nitrogen-fixing bacteria live adjacent to plant roots, surviving off root exudates and serving as a source of nitrogen in return. These bacteria live in the rhizosphere or are linked via the mycorrhizae highway. Bacteria are responsible for most of the cycling of nitrogen, carbon, and sulfur within the soils. Next, microarthropods are animals with an exoskeleton, a very hard external covering of the body, Generally a segmented body and jointed appendages. Examples found in the soil would include mites and springtails. They can be either herbivores or predators. In addition to preying on other microorganisms, they shred organic matter, which helps stimulate microbial activity. Nematodes. Nematodes are microscopic, non-segmented worms. The typical gardener will often associate the term nematodes with root-feeding nematodes, such as root knot or sting nematodes. In addition to these, which are commonly thought of as pests of plants, there are fungal and bacterial feeding nematodes as well as predatory nematodes. Not all nematodes are bad. They cycle nutrients and are a food source for other microbes, and some of them consume bacteria and pathogenic fungi, which can suppress disease. Then protozoa are single-celled organisms also, such as amoebas and ciliates. They're larger than bacteria and very mobile in the rhizosphere, the region of soil adjacent to plant roots, where all the microbes are most abundant and active. They cycle nutrients, especially nitrogen, when feeding on bacteria, which also helps regulate the bacterial populations and other protozoa. So I hope I've convinced you that the soil microbiome is an entire living ecosystem. We can hold a handful of soil and think of all that activity that's going in there. So we're going to look a little further back and we're going to talk about the soil texture. The soil type, sand, silt, and clay, is particle size. So all of our soils are made up of particles as well as all this microbiology. The soil texture is going to be that of either sand, silt, or clay, or some combination of those. This triangle here illustrates the name based on the percentage of each of those three sizes of particles. I venture to say most of what we'll find in our southeastern North Carolina region would be a sandy loam, sometimes a loamy sand, or on the beach, maybe sand alone. So the soil texture doesn't change, but soil structure can. So in soil structure, this refers to the grouping of the soil particles, sand, silt, clay, organic matter, and perhaps fertilizers, into different porous compounds. These are called aggregates. Soil structure also refers to the arrangement of these aggregates separated by pores and cracks. And of course, you recognize that the pores and cracks are very important because that's where we know we have our living soil microorganisms. So, how do we improve our organic matter content, since the better organic matter content is going to allow a better soil microbiology? Well, the USDA recommends 4 soil health planning principles, and this would be geared toward farmers, but that definitely applies to the home gardener as well. First, reduce soil disturbance. For decades in farming, we have tilled soil. That's disturbing the soil. The idea is there's a lot of functioning microbiology that you disturb if you do turn up the soil. So you really want to, even in your home garden, reduce disturbing that soil. Second principle is increase the plant diversity. Next, we want to maintain living roots throughout the year and keep our soil covered. Bare soil is going to be much more subject to erosion, and we know so much of that soil microbiology relies in the rhizosphere, that area of soil next to the roots. We want to have roots growing in our soil. So cover crops, of course, is not something you necessarily do in your home landscape, but the principle is the same, that we want to keep our soil covered. And there are things you could do, even if you have a bare spot in your lawn. For instance, you could sow some winter rye and let that have cover for the winter months. This basically just illustrates the fact that if you improve your plant diversity, you're going to improve your soil characteristics. So what do we do a lot of in our landscapes in a suburban setting? We deal with monocultures. We may have a zoysia lawn and loropetalum shrubs and an oak tree, okay? We need to do things to improve the diversity of the plant material in our landscapes, and that will help improve the diversity of the soil microbiome. This is an example in Brazil, actually, where eco-mowing was practiced. They sling a cover crop that is grown in the aisles or alleys between the trees underneath the tree to create a compost. It would be nice to be able to plant the cover crop all the way up to the tree, but it's probably not going to be widely accepted. And so the idea of kind of a chop and drop in agriculture is very, very prevalent now. You do that to build the soil structure as that new cover crop decomposes into the soil. So rainfall absorption has a lot to do with bulk density of the soil. And this is a good example. Here, if you look at rainfall absorption in an agricultural area that's basically green plants, it takes just 15 minutes for that rainfall to absorb. Whereas in the second example, rainfall absorption in an urban space where, say, green space is limited and you've mostly got pavement, it's going to take 5 hours for that same amount of rainfall to soak in. Then if you do rainfall absorption in a compost amended urban space, you're going to see a much greater infiltration and absorption rate of this 1 inch of rainfall. Here it would be in just 1 hour. So the idea of amending your urban planting areas with compost is introduced. Water retention and uptake is definitely increased when you do increase your soil organic matter. And these numbers are valid. Every 1% increase in your soil organic matter can result in up to 20,000 gallons of available soil water per acre. So if any of you have an irrigation system and you pay for that water, or at least the power to pump the water, you recognize you could reduce your need for irrigation simply by improving the soil organic matter component. So adding compost is going to be a really good practice for both agriculture and the individual homeowner. For citrus treatment in Florida, many of the growers have gone to just adding a good 1/4 inch layer of compost every year to their planting areas. And they find that improves the soil organic matter, and it also kind of re-inoculates some of the soil microbial activity with that fresh compost. For a homeowner, I think one of the things you can do is top dressing with soil, a compost product. Now you want to get a very good quality compost product. It probably is one that needs to be screened so you don't have big chips of wood in it. It also needs to be one that was thoroughly composted so that it was heated to 140 to 160 degrees to kill any of the disease pathogens or weed seeds. And there are good quality compost products available. And again, a 1/4 inch application is a top dress. Maybe it's on the root zone of your shrubs or a vegetable garden, or even in your turf grass. You can top dress with this compost and see that really improve the soil organic matter content as well as your nutrient holding and water holding capacity. So the secret to richer carbon capturing soil is to treat your microbes well. We have to figure out how to lock away the carbon in dead plants so it doesn't just return to the atmosphere. The obvious place to put that carbon is in the soil. So for years, scientists and governments have been urging farmers to leave their crop residue, the stalks and leaves, on the ground so it would be incorporated into the soil. So sometimes this doesn't work. Farmers will leave residues on a field and they won't turn into the soil, they just sit there. Now a simple idea is spreading that could allow farmers to reliably pull the carbon out of the atmosphere and into the soil. What we want to do is anything we can to kind of encourage that decomposition. And again, something like applying a top dress of compost is going to aid that decomposition and get that carbon back into the soil. In the case of turf grass, I think it's very important to recognize doing something as simple as letting your grass clippings decompose on the soil versus collecting them and hauling them away. It's a very easy principle to help build your soil organic matter in your lawn. Next, I want to introduce you to a challenge we have going on currently at the Arboretum. This is at the very end of the garden closest to Oleander Drive. I encourage you to come visit us. We're free and open every day from 8 to 5. It's called Soil Your Undies. And what we've done is we've planted some nice tidy-whitey briefs into 6 different soil types. It was just implemented in early September, and by the end of October or early November, we'll actually harvest the briefs and see which underwent the highest level of decomposition. So we have 6 different soil types ranging from a local backyard, arboretum soil, an organic farm, a traditional growing area at the Horticulture Crops Research Station, and then 2 different kinds of compost. One of the composts is from the landfill's Huckleberry in-vessel composter, and the other is a finished compost product from Wilmington Compost Company. So anyway, we invite you to come take a peek, and then as we get closer to the end of October, we'll actually publish the results, publicize the results of the decomposition. And of course, the theory is that the higher organic matter content, the higher the soil microbial activity, the quicker decomposition we'll see. So maybe it'll be one of those compost products where we end up just with the elastic Hanes waistband and maybe very little undie underneath that. So anyway, stay tuned for that. I think it's kind of fun. So how do you know if your cover crops or compost amendments are making any difference in your soil? Well, a very quick way is to dig down and look for earthworms. Worms thrive in soil environments that have good organic matter content and microbial diversity. Earthworms are a very good sign. So determining the impact of the soil microbial community is very important. This figure here illustrates 2 different management techniques of citrus groves. Figure A was a very high input management strategy, and B was a low input. Each circle represents a different microbial group. The connections between each circle indicate the interaction between the soil bacteria and fungi. The low input grove has a more interconnected network compared to the high input grove, but the impact of these different connections on the tree performance is still being determined. But the idea that we have low inputs of synthetic products, we are doing something to foster those networks in the soil microbes. So what makes a healthy soil? A soil that can sustain plants and other organisms. The keys are biological diversity of your plant material, your plant cover, as well as the soil organic matter content. Remember that a few billion microorganisms live in only 1 gram of soil, and soil microbial diversity is the key. What influences the soil health also? Soil pH. Microorganisms often prefer a specific pH range. Now, I'll mention to you that the addition of soil organic matter has a tendency to mitigate soil pH. For instance, if you have a very high pH soil, you can add organic matter to bring that down. If you have a very low pH soil, you can add organic matter to bring the pH up. So soil organic matter is very important to bring the range into the middle ground where your soil microbes are happiest. Remember that plant species is important because the root exudates feed the microbes. The more different kind of plants you have, the more different kind of microbes you're going to support. Soil carbon and soil nitrogen are going to be found when there's an abundance of microbes, and we can keep all of this in mind with our land, crop, and water management. I want to mention briefly that flooding does impact soil health. There are microorganisms that can survive and even thrive during periods without oxygen. They use different metabolic pathways or through dormant states. But flooding does generally change the overall soil microbial community composition, but the change may not be long-term. So don't worry if you have areas of your soil that are flooded. They can recover. One of the things I love seeing in agriculture is innovative methods of weed control. So instead of using herbicides in our food crops, there's alternatives such as steaming weeds. Plants don't like extreme heat. It makes the cells break down. And so that's an opportunity we could actually use as a homeowner. There are things known as flame weeders. Be careful. And if you're a pyro, I don't recommend doing that without supervision, but you definitely can think of creative ways to get your weeds under control that don't include herbicides. The ratio of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur in humus are reasonably constant. This constant ratio in humus is a fundamental property. So I want to mention briefly that humus is the fully decomposed component of organic matter. For instance, if you have a 5% organic matter content in your soil, you may have a 4% humic matter content. That's the part that's finished breaking down. So those ratio of nutrients are going to be equal in humus. Remember, add compost, plant cover crops, avoid tilling, and build your soil health. We had a field day in Lake County, Florida, and showed great results from the cover crops used in the grove. Also remind you that NC offers soil tests. We have the soil test kits available for free up until Thanksgiving here at the New Hanover County Extension office at the Arboretum. You can take a soil sample and send that off and get an analysis. We can also give site-specific fertilizer and lime recommendations based on the crop that you're growing. And it is free April through November, but it will cost you $4 if you do it in the winter months. This is what one of the soil test reports looks like. And I encourage you, if you haven't done one, to get one for your landscape so you kind of know what you're dealing with. And then there's lots of resources available. I particularly like this one from the Sustainable Ag Research and Education Center, What is Soil Health? And that's all for today. Thank you very much. And I think I'll be available for a question and answer period as set up by the Native Plant Festival.